Is Trump really trying to play in our faces with this strategic messaging about Nigeria? So he just called Nigeria a country of particular concern because, in his words, Christians are being slaughtered. And he is talking about the 3,100 Christians who've sadly been killed, right? But we need to slow that right down, because when you use faith like that and you ignore the Muslims dying too, it starts to feel like their lives don't count. And more than that, it hides what's actually driving the violence, because do you really think that this is about religion? Anyway, I need you guys to stick with me so you can see what's actually going on here, right? It's the same conflict, same killers, and this isn't new. It's chaos that's been brewing for years. Armed groups, gunmen, rogue herders, all moving through gaps that the governments have failed to fill, right? Isn't this the same play that we've seen in Haiti, Sudan, DRC? Convenient? Break the state, then swoop in with a savior story. Why now? Why Nigeria? Well, here's what they're not saying, right? Nigeria's got $40 billion in oil exports, some of the largest gas reserves in Africa, solid minerals, gold, lithium, tin, resources that maybe the US needs, especially in a Cold War with China. And it's not just what's underground, is it? It's the land. The Middle Belt grows the food that feeds the nation, fertile, rain-fed, high yield. And guess where the most violence hits? Right there. And I need to clarify, right? People aren't being killed just because they're Christian. They're being killed because they're in the way. And many of them happen to be Christian because that's what it dominates that area, right? So this isn't just about faith. It's about land control, food and power. That same zone full of ginger farms, mineral-rich soil, and foreign players are circling. The Gates Foundation invested in smallholder farming, agri-tech, yield targets. This is not a conspiracy, right? This is public record. But when the West enters through aid, it rarely ever stops at support. And some will say that these killers don't move alone, right? They're backed, tolerated, or armed by whoever's buying access. Local counterparts, foreign deals, the highest bidder. So when you hear Christian persecution, ask what's really at stake and how close the nearest air path is, right? Because China's already in, right? Ports, refineries, defense deals, ammunition, factories. And now Trump wants Congress to get involved. That's not just concern. That's positioning. Because when America talks about saving Christians overseas, come on, man, is this really about faith? It looks like it might be a green light. It moves money, activates voters, justifies presence. And while that's happening, he's also saying, you know what? Maybe we should save Nigeria's best talent and make them come over and move to America. So which is it? Are you worried about the people dying? Or are you more concerned about scouting the ones who survive? That's not rescue, that's resource control. So what's the play? If I'm Nigeria, I tighten internal defense, limit foreign boots. If I'm a citizen, start asking who's funding the next rescue mission. This isn't about God, is it? What is it about? Nigeria's rise, the deals, the land, the leverage. Have they made it too powerful to ignore? Anyway, let's talk.
Something dark is moving in Nigeria. And the whole of Africa can feel the vibration. The whole of Africa can see what is happening when the children of Africa or when the children of Nigeria are vanishing, when schools are being targeted, when fear becomes a weapon. And what I know, somebody is benefiting from what is happening in Nigeria. Nothing happens without a purpose. Nothing happens without anything triggered behind it. I take this opportunity to thank you all for joining here. This is Neo Africa, where we tell African stories. And today I'm going deep into Nigeria because it is the giant of Africa. And as the giant of Africa, there's a lot of questions that are being asked. And getting those answers is a little bit hard for us to get. But I just want to try to dig in to see what is happening, to see who is behind Nigeria mass kidnappings, and why does the world pretend not to see what is happening to our own country. Welcome.
Trump is always ready to play the victim card when it comes to people in Africa. He was really quick to lie on the South Africans, who still have towns that are white only, and say that white South Africans were being persecuted and unalived in South Africa, leading to him bringing over 60 South Africans on American taxpayer dimes and giving them visas and a pathway to citizenship, while kidnapping brown people off the street and sending them to gulags with no due process. He used that lie about white South Africans being persecuted in order to justify him doing that. And now he's trying to use the attacks going on in Nigeria to start a war with Nigeria. Now, there has been an uptick of late of armed groups attacking people in Nigeria. Bone Spurs wants to say that these attacks are focused specifically on Christians. To the surprise of no one at all, that is not true. And now that Nicki Minaj, who is basically a female Kanye at this point, is backing up Bone Spurs' ideas and speaking on behalf of the US, I think it's time to correct the record. Now, what's going on over there is armed groups are attacking people and kidnapping people for ransom. Now, the places that they have been attacking have indeed been churches, schools, and just plain residents on the street. And it's the churches that are getting the attention of people like Bone Spurs and Nicki Minaj so that they can somehow make the Christians look like victims while completely ignoring the Muslims and the people of no faith who are also being attacked. And we got to be honest here, after what the Christians did during the whole snap situation, the Christians are looking for a win because right now they are looking like they're going on their way to the hot box. They definitely did not make their faith look good in these past couple of months. And Bone Spurs has also been looking for a good distraction away from the E-Man files, especially now. So he has been doing everything he can to try to start a war with somebody. And he basically told Nigeria that if they don't stop those attacks, then he's going to send boots on the ground in Nigeria. As if they don't have enough problems at the moment. Now, just this week, 2 people were unalived in a Christian church, but 25 Muslim girls were attacked and abducted from a school. A teacher and a security guard at that school were unalived, and the girls were taken. Only 2 of the girls have managed to escape so far. And this seems to be the MO. They will attack unalive people at the site and then take a lot of the others. And they ask for ransom money to get them back. So those people's families have to sell what they own or come up with the money somehow to pay the ransom so that they can give their loved ones back. That's the scheme. It doesn't have anything to do with the religion of the people. It is just the fact that they are people, and if you kidnap those people, then their families may pay a hefty price to get them back. If Bone Spurs and Nicki Minaj actually cared about what was really going on over there, then they would be trying to work with President Tinubu over there to help their security forces deal with this issue. Instead, they have to not only deal with the people who are terrorizing the communities, but they have to deal with the US threatening them and the spread of mis and disinformation to demonize them. Nigeria has about 220 million people, and it is pretty evenly split between Muslims and Christians. Most of the Muslims live in the north, and that is where most of these attacks are taking place. So in essence, more Muslims are actually being attacked by these groups than Christians. If you listen to Bone Spurs talk about it, you think that Christians are this small, tiny little subgroup surrounded by all these Muslims and they're being picked on. That is not the case. These attacks have much more to do with the limited resources than anything else. And I think it's really ridiculous that they had Nicki Minaj talking about this. Not only does she not have any ties whatsoever to Nigeria, she is from Trinidad, and she doesn't even have American citizenship. Why is she talking about it? I have more of a connection to the Nigerians than she does. And she's not doing anything but spewing the same rhetoric that Bone Spurs is, and allowing Christians here on the wrong side of history to play the victim once again by using mis and disinformation to try to prove a point that doesn't exist.
So Donald Trump wants to go to war with Nigeria. He says the Christians there are being massacred. And he's right. Christians are being massacred. But what he doesn't mention is that more Muslims are being killed than anyone else. And what he also doesn't mention is that the origin story of ISWAP, the group responsible for most of the killing, was ultimately a United States creation. But before we go back to the beginning, let's make sure we understand where we currently are so that we understand who is being accused of doing all the killing. Let's start off with the Fulani. I could do a whole video on the Fulani, but here's a brief synopsis. The Fulani are one of the oldest and largest ethnic groups in West Africa. They are an ancient group of cattle herders. For well over 1,000 years, the Fulani have traveled up and down West Africa, leading their cattle, goat, and sheep to fresh water and grass as the seasons change. That has been the livelihood of the Fulani since ancient history. Nomadic cattle herders. And throughout history, there has always been conflict with the Fulani's herd encroaching on private farmland. But over the years and more recently, the amount of land for the cows to graze has decreased due to climate change. But also, more of the land has been turned into private farmland primarily owned by Christians. And the Fulani are Muslim. So it's easy to frame this as Christian persecution, but it's not. The conflict between the Muslim Fulani and the Christian farmers is not a religious conflict. It is simply a historical and ever-increasing conflict over land, resources, and the Fulani way of life. And again, that could be a whole nother video, but I'll stop there. Because the real story of Christian persecution and mass killings began with Boko Haram, a group that eventually became known as ISWAP. ISWAP stands for Islamic State West African Province. It is the official West African branch of America's mortal enemy, ISIS. But let's start with Boko Haram. Boko Haram literally translates to Western education is forbidden. It was founded in early 2000 by a radical preacher named Mohammed Yusuf, and the goal was to purify Islam in Nigeria. They believe that the Nigerian government is ungodly. They believe that Western schools corrupt the minds of Muslim children, and they want to turn Nigeria into a purely Islamic state under Sharia law. And they believe that anyone who doesn't agree is the enemy. Originally, Boko Haram started off as a religious study group, but over time, Yusuf's sermons became more and more militant. Boko Haram members started forming militias, and they would frequently get into confrontations with the community and local police. In 2009, one of these confrontations turned into a full-scale revolt, spreading across several cities. They attacked police stations, prisons, and government buildings. The Nigerian military responded, killing over 700 Boko Haram members. Later that same year, Yusuf was captured and killed in police custody. This is when Yusuf's deputy, Abu Bakr Shako, took control of Boko Haram and waged war on the Nigerian state. They went from a fringe religious sect to a full-blown jihadist extremist group. We're talking about bombings for the first time in Nigeria, massacring civilians, kidnappings, burning down villages. They were a full-fledged terror organization with the goal of taking over the country. By late 2014, Boko Haram controlled an area of Nigeria roughly the size of Belgium, and their ideology was closely aligned with that of ISIS, to the point that Shako would copy their tactics and propaganda style. Shako would film beheadings and execution videos just like ISIS used to do, and he even called himself the Commander of the Faithful, which is the same title that Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, used. And this eventually caught the attention of ISIS. And on March 7, 2015, Shako publicly pledged allegiance to Baghdadi, and Boko Haram officially became ISWAP. The goal of ISIS has been to create a global caliphate, so they were glad to welcome this expansion into West Africa. Unfortunately, they did not realize how unhinged Shako actually was. Shako proved to be even too extreme for ISIS. They especially took issue with his indiscriminate killing of Muslims. He killed more Muslims than anyone else. So in 2016, they replaced him with someone more politically minded. And this someone was Abu Musab al-Barnawi, Yusuf's son. Yusuf being the original creator of Boko Haram, before Shako took it off the deep end. And Shako was not happy about that. So two factions were formed. You now had Boko Haram under Shako's leadership, still as violent and chaotic as ever. Then you had ISWAP under al-Barnawi's command, who was more organized, principled, and reported to ISIS leadership. Shako was considered to be completely unhinged and paranoid. He would execute his own generals for questioning his authority. Many members of Boko Haram defected into ISWAP. And by 2020, with the backing of ISIS, ISWAP grew to become the dominant faction. And in May of 2021, ISWAP launched an attack on Shako's base in the Sambisa forest, which resulted in Shako unaliving himself with a vest before being captured. I guess he refused to be taken alive. Almost all of Boko Haram was then absorbed by ISWAP. Now, what's interesting is that in the same year, right after successfully removing Shako, al-Barnawi disappears. Nobody knows if he died, if he ran away. Nobody knows. And since then, ISWAP's leadership has been largely unstable and hard to pin down. So all that to say, when Trump says that there is a war on Christians in Nigeria, it's not really as simple as just that. Yes, Christians are the enemy of ISIS. As far as ISIS is concerned, Western civilization and Christians are synonymous. But it's not just Christians. In all actuality, over 70% of all ISIS casualties have been Muslim. The goal of ISIS is to create a global caliphate. They want Muslim rule. I mean, if you take a step back and just look at world history from a lens of religion, we have been in a religious war since the beginning of time, and it persists to this very day, all across the world. Christianity is a threat to Islam. Islam is a threat to Christianity. This has been going on forever. And we have been fighting against ISIS ever since we helped create them in Afghanistan back in 1979, when they were called the Mujahideen. There are Christian lobbies dedicated to lobbying our government to protect Christians from persecution anywhere in the world. And in my opinion, this really helps to explain why Trump uses the language of defending Christians when talking about war with Nigeria. It is true that Christians are being targeted in coordinated attacks by ISWAP. That cannot be denied. But it is also true that non-extremist Muslims and regular citizens are being killed every day in far greater numbers. And if I had to guess, I would say that this sudden push to wage war on ISWAP is a continuation of the war that we have been waging on ISIS for the past 45 years. Now, I was going to try to cover the origin story of ISIS in this video, but it's already running kind of long. So if you would like for me to explain the history of ISIS, why and how we helped create them, and why we have been at war with them ever since, just let me know. Because I promise, it is a much more fascinating story than the one that we have been fed by our government.
Now, Nigeria is just a country with 200 million people. It is an African heartbeat, and we call it the giant of Africa, the culture influence of entire continent, and its economy impacts market across West Africa. Okay, its politics stability shapes ECOWAS, and its youths, millions of them, represent the future of Africa. So when tragedy strikes in Nigeria, it is not a Nigerian problem, but it is an African problem. It is a continental problem, because if the biggest black nation on earth is struggling to protect its children, is struggling to protect itself, then what does that mean for the rest of us? What does that mean for Ugandan, for Kenyan? What does that mean for Rwandese, for Burundians? Are we safe? Are we really safe? Now, many of you don't know what exactly is happening in Nigeria, and I will tell you in a very simple terms. In the last few weeks, hundreds of students have been kidnapped from schools. In the last few weeks, teachers, pastors, and community leaders have been abducted. Churches have been raided. Over 300 students were taken in one incident. About 50 escaped, leaving over 250 students still missing. Now, I have seen international leaders have intervened. Even the Pope have intervened, and they are calling for their release. And this is not one of isolated event, but it is part of the pattern, what is going on in Nigeria, a pattern that has been there for more than decades, a pattern that targets children, a pattern that targets women, schools, churches, and rural communities. Okay? And this pattern, it may be benefit some powerful network. That's how I think. It is benefiting some powerful network. And we must ask questions. Why schools? Why churches? Or why now? Okay? Who is gaining power from this? Who gains from destabilizing Nigeria? Who is behind what is happening in Nigeria? Okay? Now, we have some different faces on what is happening in Nigeria. And one of the faces behind this, you may hear they mention the bandit gang in the northwest. The bandit gang. So these are the groups of mainstream media focuses on, or that mainstream media focuses on. Okay? And I think it is far from the truth, because the truth is they are only the lowest level of the ladder. Bandits gang are only the lowest level of the ladder. Okay? Because they are the foot soldier of someone. Number two, they mention Boko Haram and other extremist groups. And Boko Haram, they use kidnappings as a political weapon. We all know that. They target schools to spread fear. They target schools to stop education, to disrupt normal life, to control rural communities. And again, they are not acting alone. Boko Haram are not acting alone. Somebody is supplying weapons, somebody is funding logistics, and somebody is coordinating information. I just don't have proof who is it. But I know something that is happening in Africa, something negative that is happening in Africa. Because when they want to extract resources from Africa, they need to create a problem. And then they try coming in to solve the problem. And when they come to solve the problem, that's when the whole drama starts, or that's when the whole extraction happens. So I believe from deep in my heart that someone is behind this. Again, on this drama, on these kidnappings, we have political sponsors and local power brokers. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable. Okay? Some kidnappings happens because politicians want to weaken opponents. Some kidnappings happens because politicians want to control territories or want to manipulate elections. And Dr. Onohua calls this violence entrepreneurship. I call it violence of benefit. I call it monetary violence. And again, I call it economical violence, as I mean violence as a political business. We'll go into that. Now, we have again international interest, as I said. One of these international interests, okay, this international interest, it's part of, no one wants to disclose it on national TV. No one wants to talk about it on the mainstream media. But many African scholars, including professors, for example, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, have warned this. Whenever Africa is in chaos, somebody outside Africa is benefiting. Somebody outside Africa is benefiting. So kidnapping creates instability. Kidnappings creates dependency. Kidnapping creates justification, the control of resources, and weakened African governments. When you are weak, somebody will come. So the question is Nigeria chaos sponsored, spontaneous, or strategic? Those are the questions that we need to answer. Another question is, why are they on children's? Why are children the target? I will answer that. Because why don't you just target banks? Why don't you target corporations? Why don't you target political elites? Why children? One is because it's the easiest to control. Children are the easiest to control. Children are the fastest to panic. Children are symbols of nation failure. And again, children are the quickest way to break a community spirit. You can reach a parent by using their children. That's what it's being believed. And I think that's why they are targeting children. And this is to tell parents what? You are not safe. This is to tell parents that you cannot trust your government, that your future is not guaranteed. Again, the kidnapping industry has become $1 billion business in Nigeria. How? Because, let me talk about money, because I call it economic kidnapping. Because violence always follows money. According to multiple security reports from Nigeria, research has come out with this. Kidnappings is now a multi-billion naira industry. Again, kidnappings bring money through ransoms, are paid privately, and some locals politicians pay gangs to protect their political interest. You understand that? Now, why is this crisis escalating right now? Why is this moment escalating right now? Number one, because weak security infrastructure, weak security or weak security has an impact to infrastructure. How? Let me give you, for example, I was telling you, when Nigeria is too large, Nigeria has a lot of population to under police. Okay? Now, why are they kidnapping now? Why the crisis is escalating right now? Okay? I've talked about weak security infrastructure. we have economic pressure. When I talk about economic pressure, we have unemployment, we have poverty there. When you talk about poverty, we have 200 million people, 200 million Nigerians, a lot of them being youths, under pressure of being unemployed. Okay? Now, millions of young men feel like they have nothing to lose. So what do? They enter into some shady moves. They enter into some shady businesses. Okay? Now, why now? Because we have political transition. Why am I talking about political transition? I'm talking about every election cycle, it creates tension. Every election cycle, it creates power struggle. And opportunities are or opportunities for armed groups are there to take advantage. Okay? And that's why this is happening right now. That's why this is happening right now. Now, this is the part you are waiting the most. The deep forces behind Nigeria's kidnapping. Who is behind Nigerians' kidnappings? Because personally, I sat down and think about this and I was like, okay, who is there? Who is behind? Politicians? International? Gangs? Who is behind? To understand this bigger pattern, to understand what is happening, we need to understand this. African chaos is never accidental. Because before we talk about Nigeria specifically, we must understand a painful truth of African history. Chaos in Africa is rarely random. How? Because somebody always benefits, somebody wants power, somebody always funds it, somebody always drives it. And Professor Mahmoud once said this: African violence is almost always political, okay? And it's often international. This means what? This means when a region collapses, when schools are attacked, when rebels have money, when kidnappings get supplies, it's not coincidence. Somebody is behind it. Now, let's expose those global patterns and link them to Nigeria. We have a historical blueprint of what's happening, how Africa have been destabilized before. I'll start with the Congo to be specific. One of the Africa's richest countries, minerals, water, forest, and yet destabilized for more than 60 years. Why? Because foreign powers benefit from chaos. Okay? How do they benefit? They have cheap access to cobalt. They have cheap access to diamond. They have cheap access to coltan. And weak governments are unable to negotiate. So it's easy for them to access. Do you get that, my producer? Weak governments are unable to negotiate. Wow. Now, this pattern shows us that you create insecurity, you weaken the government, you extract resources quietly. It happened in Libya, the nation with the highest standard of living in Africa before 2011. But what happened? The nation with the highest standard of living before 2011, what happened to it? Foreign intervention destroyed it. They destroyed Gaddafi. And now we have militias, we have human trafficking, and we have a lot that is happening in Libya and has weakened the economy of Libya. The pattern is destabilize a strong African country. Arms spread, bring your bases, region collapse. Number 3, we have Sudan, a country now in civil war. Number 4, we have Mozambique. Pattern is the same. In Sudan, pattern is the same. We create disturbance, and we do what? we extract resources. So the pattern goes on and on. The pattern is the blueprint, goes on and on from Congo all the way to Mozambique. Now, look at Nigeria through the same lens. Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. Nigeria is a nation with massive national gas reserves. Nigeria is a major consumer market. So what's happening there? Foreign power are looking for what? Foreign power are looking for cheap oil. They are looking for cheap labor. They are looking for weak governments. They are looking for military presence in West Africa. So what do? The same pattern, destabilize the country. And when they destabilize the country, they will get what? They will have easy access to these cheap resources. And this is where the role of international arms network comes in. Because no kidnapper smells, steal, and build AK-47s in the forest. No. No bandit manufacture ammunition. No extremist group produces high-tech weapons. So where do they come from? Where do they come from? I'll end my video on this. They come from international weapon traffickers. They come from post-Libya arms market. They come from private militia contractors or military contractors. They come from corrupt border officials. Again, they come from global black market suppliers. When Libya collapsed in 2011, weapons spread across West Africa like wildfire. And that was the beginning of Boko Haram increment. That was the beginning of bandit gangs. That was the beginning of Sahel-wide insurgencies. That was the beginning of the kidnapping. Meaning what? This means the rise of kidnapping in Nigeria is not simply local criminal activity. It is the byproduct of global weapon circulation. And who gains in this Nigerian saga? Who gains if foreign troops enter Nigeria? Who gains? Military bases, influence over Nigeria's policies, control over Gulf of Guinea, access of oil-rich regions. Who gains if Nigeria begs for foreign security assistance? Foreign nation gets what? Gets easy access, gets oil rights, gets easy contracts, leverages over Nigeria politics. Who gains if Nigeria investors flee their own country? Foreign companies gain. Because of what? Because local competition collapses, Nigerians move business abroad. Who gains if millions of children in northern Nigeria didn't go to school? Uneducated youth become vulnerable. Uneducated youths become more cheap. So what? They get cheap labor. So you see the pattern. Who is gaining is who has been gaining in Libya, in Congo, in Sudan, is he who is gaining in Nigeria. I will end that. And if you love this topic, we have part 2 of this. Who gains from the Nigeria or from the Sahel or from the chaos that is happening in African countries? Let me end that there. Make sure you subscribe. Until next episode, peace out.